Good morning and welcome to Cheche, where opinion counts. My name is Fred Ndimuli. Now, education is one sector that has and continues to experience tremendous reforms under the administration led by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Now, while launching Form 1 selection this week, Cabinet Secretary in charge of that docket, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, made pronouncements that are said to have far-reaching effects on the sector. Matters to do with the rollout of free secondary education, the new curriculum, and transition from primary to post-primary level, as well as general administration of institutions of learning. While many agree and support the Cabinet Secretary on his style of leadership and his push for reforms in the sector, others are skeptical about the sustainability of these major changes. Others, meanwhile, are simply opposed to the manner in which new ideas are being introduced in the running of schools. Today on Cheche, we seek to better understand what these changes portend for the education sector and the country as a whole. To help us discuss this, we have with us Robert Masese, Acting Director General Basic Education at the Ministry of Education. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
We also do have Dr. Andrew Cheche, a Policy Analyst and Senior Lecturer in Economics of Education, Department of Educational Administration and Planning, College of Education and External Studies at the University of Nairobi. Our regular panelists on Cheche, Mutegi Njau and Charles Odhiambo are also present. Good morning, gentlemen. Karibuni sana. Today, there's no confrontation. We're just simply trying to get to understand better what all these changes in education sector portend for the country. And probably let's start because all these things have been discussed publicly. And the main question, and we'll start with the Acting Director General for Basic Education. There are concerns that we are being a bit over-ambitious in trying to effect a lot of changes at once. Free secondary education, a new curriculum, 100% transition to secondary school. Do you agree with that we could be a bit over-ambitious?
I wouldn't agree. If anything, I think we are lagging behind time in terms of having those initiatives in place. You are aware of the constitutional provision that demands of us to provide free compulsory basic education to all children. It's a constitutional requirement. You are aware that the curriculum reform is an activity and best practices that is taken, that is carried out all over the world, in different countries, in periods not exceeding 5 years. Ours has been in place for over 13 years, and therefore we can't sit back and say we shouldn't be ambitious. Mm-hmm. So I think the reforms that are in place are well timed. Some of them are long overdue in terms of ensuring that we are in compliance with the constitutional provision of compulsory free basic education. On the matter of transition, 100% transition from primary to secondary, I mean, why would anybody want to complain? Why would anybody want this country to continue wasting its youth by not providing opportunities for them to transit from one level to the next? Should we sit back and be afraid of the danger of having all our children in moving from primary to secondary? Or are we not better off ensuring that everybody transits? And basically that's what informing the.
Okay. Yeah. But Dr. Cheche is a policy expert on matters education. Some of these things are labor intensive, change in curriculum. This rollout of the free secondary education, not just labor intensive, even in terms of resources, the kind of resources that are available currently. Shouldn't we have at least handled or tackled one thing at a time, probably the rollout of the new curriculum, then later this rollout of the free secondary education, then later an expansion of the infrastructure to accommodate even more students at the secondary level? That's hence the question, are we being over-ambitious in trying to do all these things in one tranche?
First, I think we need to appreciate, Fred, the fact that the Jubilee government has made efforts to streamline the education sector, which for a long time has been inefficient, limited transition from, between the level, different levels of education, children completing different levels without skills, and hence increasing the rate of youth unemployment. So I think it's a good effort. However, I will respond more specifically by saying that yes, the government is ambitious, but it's because, as the DG pointed out, it's a constitutional requirement. The challenges of what the ministry or the government of Kenya is doing is informed by three major principles of education financing. That is adequacy of funds, efficiency in the use of those funds, and thirdly, equity in the distribution of these resources. And that's in line with the Constitution of Kenya 2010 that has made basic education free and, a constitutional right. So we need now to look at adequacy. Do we have adequate resources? Now, the question, of course, maybe we don't have adequate resources, but do we efficiently use available resources? That is where the problem has always been, and that's why I appreciate the efforts that the Ministry of Education, the CS for Education, is coming up with, that we can discuss.
Bonamutegi and Charles, you've covered matters education for many years. These reforms being undertaken are not anything easy to undertake. Do you think that it is that easy that the CS can come up, he's effected exam reforms within a year, now we're already applauding him? Do you think that all these changes are something that are could possibly be done within the next few months? Mutegi.
Before we came to sit here, I had a chat with the director here, and we were talking about 844. And I remember when it started, my son was in standard 3, and we were required to buy saws,
a jack plane,
saws, hammers, and we are going to have a situation where everybody who leaves primary school will be able to do some technical work. And he was telling me, these ideas are good, but how is the implementation going to be?
Yes.
That is really the crux of the matter. A few weeks ago, the NAT boss was here, Sosion, and the director of Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development were here. They were quarreling about, are we ready? They did some studies, and the NAT boss was saying, we don't even know how to implement it. Are we ready in January to implement that? Are our schools ready to do that? That really matters to me.
Yes.
For me, Fred, from where I sit, over-ambitious may not be the best reference to this. I think the ministry and the government, for that matter, are ambitious. One, because we are lagging behind time-wise. We promulgated a constitution in 2010 that sought to ensure that children get mandatory basic education. And, of course, that leads to the 100% transition. So I don't think it's over-ambitious. And I must commend the government for what they are doing. The issue about, he talked about equity, availability of resources. A few years back, you had to know somebody at Jogo House for your school to get money. Today, at least even if not 100% affected, schools get money. Schools whose head teachers or principals don't even know where Nairobi is. But they still get money. Yes. My only issue with all this is the involvement a bit of politics in it. It's watering down the whole thing. And I will challenge the Director General here about the provisions of the Basic Education Act, which, among other things, provides for parents to support the education of their children, either through looking for finances or any other provisions that they can. But then here is the government coming in and saying again, we have put a fee structure, you can't raise more money because they want to please the masses. So it's bringing the whole confusion. But the steps they are taking, they are bold steps that even if we waited 50 years, a few people will still come up and say, no, we are not yet ready. Yes. I think we were ready yesterday. We have to bite the bullet. We have to start it somewhere.
Here's the question. You mentioned something about 844, the way it started and all the optimism that came with it, but a few years later, the steam ran out. Now, when you embark on so many different things at a go, if you lose steam on one of those, it is bound to affect the others as well. In terms of sustaining this kind of reforms, don't you think that probably, if at all one it would have been carried out progressively. You deal with one, make sure it is sustainable, then move to the other. Probably it would have been different, so that we avoid the risk of losing steam down the line.
And Muli, what we are saying is that free day secondary education program is not being, is not something we are starting today. We have been having some level of subsidized secondary education in the past. Since 2003, primary education has been free. We have at least, the government has made effort to finance primary education. Since 2008, we have had the free day secondary education program. What we are doing is that we are ratcheting up the level of funding to secondary schools so that we remove that component that parents have been meeting in secondary education, so that we can allow many more children to remain in school. You are aware that cost of secondary education is one of the factors that affects transition between levels. And by government dedicating more resources to ensure more children remain in school, we are actually addressing the constitutional provision that I talked about. If you have read the history of education of Korea in 1953, which is something I talk about many a time, you would find that in 1953, South Korea endeavored to ensure that all children had access to education. And the emphasis then was on ensuring that everybody had access to education. School classes were overloaded, in other words, were huge, large classes, but the policy was let everybody be in the bus, then we can look for comforts later. Are we not better off ensuring that we cover a wide population of our children than locking them out in the name of saying we will address their needs when we are ready, so that we are better off ensuring that we stretch whatever resources we have to cover the populace. And at the same time, yes, you realize that when government prioritizes education of children and the provision of free primary and free day secondary education, it's saying that the priority of government is children. We can even cut our budget allocations in other areas and fund this critical sector.
Okay.
Vision 2030 will never be realized. It will be a pipe dream if we don't invest in the education of children, which is the manpower that will provide the prerequisite skills for a sustainable and developed Kenya 2030.
But the question is, what education? What after that? What happens? I know the new curriculum divided somewhere. People to go technical, others to go elsewhere. But the way it is now, everybody wants to go to university. We took our village polytechnics and Kenya Polytechnic and all these are places where you train technicians to make them universities. What education do you want to give?
The chair has already indicated that you had the director of Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, Dr. Joan, here a few days ago, and he was discussing about the new curriculum that we intend to roll out, the competency-based curriculum, whose emphasis is more on the skills and application of the knowledge acquired than mastery of content, which is not applicable to circumstances or even life obtaining at the given time. So what we are saying is that the technical institutes that you're talking about that may have been taken over, you're aware there's coming a policy in place today to ensure that we do not have further conversion of such institutions to universities or whatever, because we realize that there's certain key skills, critical skills that the economy requires for development, hence the emphasis on technical education. And that's where you realize, Madam Tegi, that in every constituency in Kenya today, we're endeavoring to establish technical training institutions that will
those TVET colleges, which nobody wants to go to.
It's because of the attitude.
I think that is more of a societal issue.
So who sorts that matter? Who is to sort it out? Because TVETs are there, many those. Nobody. He's told me he went to Kisii and did some research. Nobody wants to go to those colleges.
Incidentally, not many people even know that the government gives 15,000 shillings for everybody enrolled in these youth polytechnics. But the perception that people have always had that this is for people who have failed in the formal education is is a big.
What you're saying is that there is a culture problem, that we are not willing to adopt even the kind of the new curriculum that we're talking about, the fact that as opposed to theoretical teachings in class, that probably we need more technical training, that it's a cultural problem. That's what Mutegi say.
I think let me go back to the question that you were asking. Why should we have all these things, all these programs, all these initiatives? And the Director General has responded. Now, I think we need to appreciate the effort to provide education by the government, because it is education and training that generates 3 outcomes. 1, knowledge, skills, and appropriate attitudes. The 3 outcomes are the ones that have transformed societies, right? So the government is making those efforts, including increasing the capitation for learners in secondary schools. So it's not something new. It's something appropriate in order to increase the number of children completing primary schools to secondary schools. There are certain skills and knowledge and attitudes that are expected to be transmitted when they are in primary, secondary, and so on and so forth. The problem is when the government calls that free secondary. And as Charles pointed out, parents relax and they are not sensitized so that they know that it's really not free.
Actually, the DG today made a very good reference. Yeah. He has kept talking about free day secondary. Correct. He has not talked about free secondary education since we started.
So I think we need to have that. Okay. The free could be political. Yes. Let's call a spade a spade.
Yes.
But as the DG has said, it's actually subsidized. And we said this when I was working as a policy analyst at the Institute of Policy Analysis and Research, IPA, in 2008, when the government was developing, was starting the subsidized secondary education. And we wrote a position paper and argued that let's call it subsidized. But of course it was political.
Yes.
So the thing is, we need to have stakeholders in general, including parents and donors and communities, private sector, doing what the government has not done to fill the gap.
Okay. Let's focus on the free secondary education for now, Bwana Director General.
Yeah.
Of course, it will be all these reforms in the education sector, or rather obviously key to President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. And as you say, you rightly put it, some politics will come into play. So when we talk about free secondary education, how exactly, how free is this free we are talking about?
Yeah, if you listen to what Doc said, there are certain costs of education that would be borne by parents. Like the food your child eats has a cost. The uniform the child puts on is a cost. The transport of the child to school is a cost. And all those things. And then we are not saying that you will put your child there and the government will give the kid shoes, they will give the food, they will give the kid transport. There are certain costs that will be borne by parents. And then, like in the free day secondary education program, we are, for example, clear that the lunch program for children who go to day schools will be borne by the parents. The only component that the government has taken over are the costs of teaching and learning, excuse me, teaching and learning, like the purchase of teaching and learning materials, some level of funding to meet the costs of salaries of workers, electricity, water. And right now, the major step is going to be in the direction of ensuring that we have medical cover for all learners in secondary school and insurance for school property. That we really are determined to do, so that no child who falls sick suffers because their parents cannot afford to have them get appropriate medical cover. So the government is working closely with the National Hospital Insurance Fund to ensure that we have that comprehensive cover for children, and that we also have a good policy, insurance policy,
So probably the word free could be misleading.
It's actually subsidized.
Subsidized.
It's actually subsidized, and the DG has kept on referring to
free
day secondary education, all right? And it's not a new thing. The thinking has always been there. I remember the Professor Douglas Odhiambo task force on realigning education to the Kenya Vision 2030 and the Constitution of Kenya 2010, where I was among the 5 consultants, made it very clear that we need to make our education more relevant and affordable. And one proposal we made in the report was, or they made in the report was, let's declassify. I mean, let's declassify our secondary schools into national,
county, extra
and,
county.
By that time
it was provincial.
Yes. So the recommendation was, let's standardize secondary schools and make most of them day. If we standardize, it means we have the same competent teachers in boarding and day secondary schools. We have the facilities that are in Lenana, in Alliance Girls, and so on, right? And the learning environment. It doesn't have to be a boarding school, but unfortunately, that is where the government has not done what was recommended. We have since increased the number of national secondary schools, which is really needless, and categorize them in such a way that the competition into those schools is intense, right? When we could actually standardize them, let's have most of them be day schools. And I'm glad that the ministry has that program of increasing the capitation so that we have more children attending secondary school.
Are you saying that the quality will definitely be affected as a direct result of effecting this free secondary education with the kind of expansion that you're talking about generally, that quality, and that probably is a price that we have as a country to say that yes, we'll pay that as a necessary evil?
No, I mean, first, before I answer that, I want to answer the question you raised earlier as to whether this should be called free secondary education, or that we are misnaming, so to say, the education program within Kenya. What we are saying is that it's free day secondary education. Why am I saying this? We are progressively heading to free secondary education. Where did we start? We started where parents were, children were getting 10,265. That was ratcheted up to 12,870. The government moved ahead to pay or meet the cost of examination, national examinations for all learners. And that goes ahead to progressively remove the costs that hinder transition, or that make that education not to be exactly free, like you're saying. Who knows with resources where we are going next? Maybe we are going to have a look at what other component of cost in education should the government take up, so that we reduce progressively, because even the constitutional provisions are clear that this is not a one-off thing. It's not a one-stroke thing that will give us compulsory free education. It is something that is progressive, and that's the spirit of the Constitution. So I think it will be wrong for us not to appreciate that it is the desire of government to consistently work towards reducing those the burdens of education. The next level would be that the government would take up more progressively, maybe meet the costs of the workers in schools, and be the one that is bearing the cost. Look at another cost that the government can bear, so that within our budgetary capacities, we progressively take away the burden and ensure that all our children.
One of the things, on the issue of quality, with this kind of expansion, given the kind of infrastructure that's already in existence, we've not seen any proper effort to expand the infrastructure before effecting free secondary education. Now we can see the number of slots are getting more and more, and we're even talking about issues of introducing day scholar streams in national schools, in Nairobi. This will definitely have an effect on the quality, don't you agree?
Not at all. The chairman, I think maybe the chairman of the panel was not born when some of those schools that are going to have day wings were having actually day wings.
You've been a principal of one of these national schools, the Nairobi school, so you do understand.
I do understand, and the Nairobi school had its own day wing at the time, and parents who would have their children stay home and come to school in the morning had them, and they have done very well. Upper Hill School.
Why did that change? If it was really working?
It was working, and there is the craze that maybe the misconception that day schooling is not a school as a boarding and all that kind of thing. So it is not going to compromise quality at all. Going back to what Doc raised about the increase in the number of national schools and extra-county schools and whatever, you realize that national schools serve certain purposes that are peculiar to our country. National schools are centers of social cohesion, integration, and equity. When you admit boys to Nairobi school from Loima, from Ijara, from every other sub-county in this country, you get a small country in a school. These children get opportunity to socialize and interact and get to appreciate the diversity of this country. So we even have gone ahead and increased the number of national schools from the 18 they were to the 103 they are today. Because if you went to any part of this country today, there are 2 national schools, one for girls, one for boys. And we want even to increase them so that all our schools, majorly those that can be able to accommodate, have the diversity of Kenya in them. When you have a school like Maseno School, admitting children from Mandera, from Turkana, from Pokot, and all of them are in Maseno School. They interact because these are the future leaders of this country, and we are giving a more inclusive education, a more exposed education to children who are going to work in all the parts of this country.
Long time ago,
just before that,
I used to teach at Ngagaru School.
You were a teacher?
Yes. And there was no Embu Girls. Embu Girls was abolished. It became one school. Boys mixed with girls. Yeah. And the girls were doing very well. And remember the girls, some of the girls I taught became serious engineers, serious lawyers. Yes. And then former President Moi decided to split the school now to Kangaru boys, to Kangaru girls. Why can't we go back to that system where children go to school? Why do we have to have boys and girls?
Actually, in reference to former President Moi, he is on record as having said that the best way to bring up children is to have them learn and grow up in mixed setups. Because that is what the society provides. But before I let Dr. say something, the DG has talked about a number of issues, especially expounding on the justification for the categorization of schools, which, as far as the ministry is concerned, is very good. I mean, we are having smaller Kenya in these schools. But what Dr. was saying is the perception out there. So, as much as the ministry is doing a very good thing, they have not worked on the buy-in effect. People still think if my child goes to a national school, then they have gone to a good school. And so I will do everything possible to have my child go to a national school, rather than people looking at it like these are just schools, only that this has more Kenyan representation than this other one. Yes. So I think I still go back to the ministry needs to work more on the social acceptance rather than beyond the policy matters. The policy matters, they're doing perfectly well. By the way, for your information, they've been sending out a lot of money to schools for infrastructural development in a bid to help with the 100% transition. They've been doing so well with ensuring that today a child who sits for exams in Lagdera is admitted at Asumbi Girls. But the perception out there is my child goes to a national school, I am sure they will go to the university.
Okay. Dr. Cheche, in terms of quality, with this expansion, yes, as Charles says, yes, there's been some attempt at expanding the infrastructure. But with this kind of free secondary education, and yes, interestingly, you point out that there was free, probably day scholar streams previously. Are we saying that the quality will not be affected in any way with this kind of expansion that you're witnessing right now? That the rollout of free secondary education, new curriculum changes, that you mentioned South Korea, you said there had to be new classes, larger classes, that this will not have any effect on the performance in schools?
Now, I think I don't think your fears...
or is it a necessary evil that, yes, fine, but after a few years we'll go back to the same performance?
I don't think quality will be compromised by just having a little more children or, completing primary schools, joining secondary schools, right? And as Fred has pointed out, Charles has pointed out, some Kenyans don't know what the government, the Ministry of Education is doing to increase the facilities. I'm talking as a chairman of board of management of a secondary school in my village. That secondary school was carved out of a primary school I studied. And the secondary school is small, but with the support of the Ministry of Education Infrastructural Capitation, we are now putting up storied, classrooms, right? So what we are saying is, so long as the free, that description of free is explained and rationalized so that parents will know that they need to chip in, it's not a new thing, and it's a good thing. Quality will be affected if there are more children joining Form 1 and in secondary schools, and there are no teachers, there are no textbooks, learning is not taking place, because it is what happens. First of all, let me explain what quality, how quality may be understood. Imagine 3 boxes. The first box here are inputs, right, for education. The second box is the process, and the two are linked with an arrow from inputs to the process of learning. The last box are outcomes or output, all right, and the 3 boxes are joined. What happens in the middle box, process, is learning taking place, right? And I can confirm from my own school that learning is taking place. We may be having a shortage of 1 or 2 teachers, but learning is taking place, right? So the thing is, we need to appreciate that step, that bold step of encouraging, of increasing more learner or participation rates at the secondary schools. Okay. And with efforts by other stakeholders to make their contributions, communities. The problem we face at the school level is parents don't want to hear anything if they are called to school. What is it? It's free.
This is how, Director, this is how quality would be compromised, Fred. Yeah. Now the government says it's free second education. I take my child to school. This child has to feed. I am supposed to pay fees for boarding to maintain this child in school. But because I have put it in my mind that the government has said free, I am casual in paying money.
So the miscommunication
for the
government could have.
So what happens? What happens is that the principal or the head teacher cannot keep a hungry child in school, even if the government provided all the books and 100% teachers. So what happens? At the end of the month, when the creditors are on their neck, they have to send the children home for fees. What happens? In a class of 40, you are left with 13 children who are paid fees fully. 27 have been sent home for fees. What happens? A teacher walks in class. The syllabus is structured in such a way that it has to be covered within the year. If 3 days are missed, it affects the syllabus. So what happens? The quality of education is compromised, because for 3 days, when majority of the class went home for fees, the teacher could not go on teaching the 13, because that would be unfair.
Okay.
So it still goes back to the ministry.
Yes.
Let politics stay out of this. Don't try to impress parents by saying we are giving it to you for free. Let parents take responsibility, because rights come with responsibility.
Yes, and I'll give you a chance, Director General, to respond to that, because we're taking a break now. When we come back, we discuss some of the challenges that definitely will be there with this rollout of free secondary education. Even before we get to issues to do with the new curriculum, let's be honest, there are challenges that are expected. What are they from the government's perspective, and probably from an expert's perspective as well? That when Cheche returns.